Hello, and welcome to the first episode of KrissNotes. What are KrissNotes, you ask? Let me tell you. It's kind of my take on the study guide slash cheater's guide to books, a series of publications known as Cliff Notes. I'm very proud to say I've never read a Cliff Notes because that's something that I think is cheating and you should read the book. But I've stopped sometimes and I've thought, man, I kind of wish there was a Cliff Notes for movies, so you could get the general idea of what a movie is about, even though you've never seen it. I got the idea to do this myself and create KrissNotes when a cousin of mine asked me about a movie, and I went into grave detail about it, just from beginning to end, because I remember the story, and I'm kind of a movie buff. And she's like, that was really great, you should do that. I couple this with the fact that several close friends of mine have told me many times I should be a movie critic, which, unless you're Roger and Ebert, is no money in. And I never agree with the critics, but I combined this and movies are something I'm in love with, so I thought, why not? Then I created KrissNotes, which is basically a cheater's guide to what a movie's about. I do also throw in my personal opinions of the movie. I'm going to rate the movie for you based on a series of criteria, scaled numbers 1 through 10, on things like acting, directing, script, production quality, music, family friendliness, all of those types of things. So you can watch my KrissNotes on this movie, and after you're done, you can decide whether you want to watch it or not. So all of that being said, welcome to the first episode of KrissNotes. Now you'll never guess which movie I picked to be my first movie. It would be Jaws, because if you know me for more than 10 seconds, you know that this is my favorite movie ever. I wish I'd actually started to keep track of how many times I've watched it, because if I kept an actual log, I'm pretty sure I hold a Guinness World Record right now for it. I've seen this movie 150 times. That's an actual number. That's not just some random number. I have literally watched this movie 150 times-ish. Somewhere I actually watched it last night. It's embarrassing. But yeah, so I thought this would be a great one to start with. I can quote it. I won't do that here. But yeah, so here's the KrissNotes on the movie Jaws. Jaws was an action suspense thriller that was released in 1975. It is actually based upon the book by Peter Benchley of the same name. It is set in 1970s New England in a fictional town called Amity. The MPAA rating for this movie is PG, even though that was back in 1975, so I think technically if you looked at it today, it would probably be closer to R. And it is 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 54 seconds long, which seems like a lot, but I've seen it several times, and it's not hard to sit through, in my opinion. I'm a little biased. The film stars Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Dreyfuss as the three main characters of the movie. It also co-stars Lorraine Gary, and I'm going to say her name because I think she does a very good job in this movie. She plays Brody's wife, and I think she's a good character even though she's not one of the main three. This film was directed by none other than the godfather of film directing, Steven Spielberg. He was very young at the time, and it was one of the first major motion pictures that he had directed. Beforehand, he had directed episodes of Columbo, The Night Gallery, Marcus Welby, and several short films. But Jaws is where he really got his start in the motion picture industry. The screenplay for the film adaptation of this was actually co-written by Peter Benchley, who was the author of the book, along with Carl Gottlieb. Now, Carl Gottlieb actually does have a minor role in the movie, but he was one of the main writers for the screenplay. The production company was Zanuck and Brown, and I think looking at their history, they've only ever produced 12 movies, so this is actually one of the big ticket ones that they've produced. Another one that they're famous for is The Sting. I may do a KrissNotes on that because that's kind of a famous one. The score for this movie was composed by none other than John Williams, who is an absolute legend in the field of film compositions. Every film composition that you can think of off the top of your head is by him, whether it be the Indiana Jones theme song, or the Jurassic Park theme song, or Star Wars, or Jaws, or Schindler's List, or many other movies that you can just think off the top of your head. John Williams is the creative mastermind slash genius behind all of these beautiful pieces of music. And Jaws is no exception. Those few piano keys that are hit every time the shark shows up are very simplistic, but you know exactly what they are when you hear them. That's all of the boring credit stuff that I find fascinating, but most people don't actually give 2 cents about. Now for the actual rundown of what the movie's about, other than the shark eating people. Because I actually talked to several people and they've never seen this movie, which makes me sad because obviously my favorite movie. But it's so old that I understand why people haven't seen it, and it's so built up, especially by me, that people start to watch it and they're like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I've never watched it. Well, if you don't ever want to watch it, just listen to my KrissNotes. I'll tell you what it's about. Amity, a fictitious small town in New England, is turned upside down when a series of violent shark attacks threatens the lives of the community, as well as the economy of their tourist-driven town. Martin Brody, the sheriff of Amity, has only been living in the town for less than a year with his wife and 2 children, and he's having trouble adjusting to the slow pace of a small town considering he's moved from New York City. The opening scene is a bunch of young college students on the beach having a campfire, and it's the 70s, so they're smoking and they're drinking and they're doing all the things that teenagers and college kids did in the 70s. Tisk tisk. A young girl there named Chrissy Watkins decides that she's bored sitting around the campfire, so she decides to go swimming. She's followed by an eager young man who's had a few too many beers and is a little tipsy. She goes into the water and the boy goes to follow her, but he's so drunk that he passes out and doesn't get that far. Well, she's out in the water. It's like dusk, so it's prime time for shark feeding. And needless to say, very famous scene, the girl dies, gets eaten by the shark. Brody gets the call from the police office because the young man didn't know what happened and reported the girl missing. He and the boy go looking for her and end up finding the dismembered remains of poor Chrissy Watkins on the beach. Brody correctly assumes what has happened to her, and it is also confirmed by the medical examiner, and he declares her cause of death a shark attack. Chief Brody springs into action and tries to close down the beaches for the safety of everyone on the island because a violent shark attack has occurred. However, the mayor steps in and tells him that he cannot do this, because if he actually closes the beaches, the town will lose way too much money, because tourists won't up and they'll go to beaches in other towns. It is almost the 4th of July, and they need the summer dollars because, again, this is a tourist-driven town, and they only have 2 months out of the year that they're very busy. He tries to convince Brody that the injuries on Chrissy Watkins were caused by a boat propeller, and is now backed up by the ME who declared it a shark attack in the first place. Brody is frustrated that the story keeps switching, but he has no choice other than to listen to the mayor and keep the beaches open against his better judgment. The next day, a young boy named Alex Kittner is attacked and killed by a shark while swimming on a crowded beach. Brody and his family happen to be on the same beach, and he sees this happen. The distraught mother of the little boy puts a $3,000 bounty on the shark and will pay any man to catch and kill it. A town meeting is called to close the beaches, but the mayor promises everyone that it will only be closed for 24 hours, which is not what Brody intended. At the meeting, when they're trying to decide how to better fix the beaches to make sure that they're safe, local eccentric Quint, who is a professional shark fisherman, offers to catch the shark for the town, but for $10,000 and not $3,000. The mayor tells Quint that he'll think about it, and the meeting is over, and the beaches are only closed for 1 day. Over the course of the next few days, all hell breaks loose in the town as strangers from everywhere are answering the ad that Mrs. Kittner has put in the paper to come and try to kill the shark for $3,000. So fishermen are coming in from everywhere. But Matthew Hooper, a marine biologist from the Oceanographic Institute, called at the request of Chief Brody, arrives on the island to try to figure out if the events that have happened are caused by a shark and not by other things. He goes to the ME's office and examines the remains of Chrissy Watkins. And surprise, surprise, it was a shark. Meanwhile, the barrage of fishermen that have come in and are taking every square inch of the ocean up trying to kill this thing have caught and killed a tiger shark. Everyone rushes down to the dock to see this tiger shark, and everybody is relieved that the killer shark has been caught and that the problem is now solved. But Hooper does not agree. He says that this shark is way too small to have caused the wounds that were on the first victim. He wants to cut it open just to be sure to check its stomach contents, just to make sure that it is the correct shark and they can all breathe a sigh of relief. But the mayor won't allow it. However, Brody and Hooper wait until nightfall and go down and cut the shark open anyway. But they do confirm that it is not the correct shark. They then go out in a boat to see if they can find the shark by looking around the area that he's been feeding. They find the wrecked boat and the remains of a local fisherman named Ben Gardner, along with a tooth that Hooper decides belongs to a massive great white shark. He accidentally drops this tooth, though. They tow the boat in, and the next morning they tell the mayor what they found. They warn him that judging by the size of this tooth, the shark is massive and it is extremely dangerous to have the beaches open, because the shark will undoubtedly attack again. But the mayor refuses to see reason and forces Brody to keep the beaches open. He says he can bring in shark spotters and boating patrols of men with guns that can patrol the swimming areas to make it as safe as possible. But alas, another attack happens, this time in a small bay where Brody's son is boating with friends. His son narrowly escapes. This is the final straw for Chief Brody, and he more or less forces the mayor to sign papers to hire Quint to kill the shark. So these three men, Hooper, Quint, and Brody, set sail to try to catch the great killer white shark that is haunting the shores of Amity. It isn't too long before it surfaces near their boat, and Quint manages to shoot it, attaching one barrel of air to the shark. The idea behind these barrels, kind of the reverse idea of weighing someone down underwater. These barrels are full of air and keeps the shark up close to the surface. But this thing is massive, and one barrel doesn't do anything, so obviously he goes under. They chase after it, however, following the barrel that keeps surfacing every now and then, until they lose track of it again. Later that night, as they're eating dinner, the subject of scars come up, and they begin to compare scars and swap stories of how they got them. Brody asks about a particular scar on Quint's arm, and he reveals that it was a tattoo that he received while aboard the USS Indianapolis. The USS Indianapolis was a military ship that went down in World War II after delivering the bomb that would later destroy Hiroshima, Japan. After it went down and it sank, he tells the story of the ship sinking and he and the other members of the crew being stranded at sea in shark-infested waters for almost a week. Most of the crew were eaten by sharks before a military helicopter flies over and sees the stranded men. All in all, 1,100 men went into the water from the USS Indianapolis, but only 316 made it. This was obviously a very traumatic time for Quint, and he tells Hooper and Brody that this is why he will never put on a life jacket again. Their reminiscing is cut short, however, when the shark attacks the boat by ramming into the hull, puncturing it and causing the electricity to go out before it swims away. They spend the rest of the night trying to fix the damage, until the barrel shows up again. By now, Brody is a little more freaked out than he could admit, and decides to call the Coast Guard on the radio to try to get help out to where they are. But Quint comes in and smashes the radio with a baseball bat, which causes some tension. But they have no time to argue about it because they need to get another barrel into the shark, because all of the ruckus has caused it to lose the first one. This time, however, Quint manages to shoot 2 barrels into the shark, and they end up tying the rope from the barrels to the back of the ship with the idea of towing the shark into land. But the shark is so big and so strong that it happens the reverse way, and the shark begins to pull the boat, causing it to go down in the water a little, and with its already damaged hull, it begins to sink. So they have no choice but to cut the shark off before he pulls the back panel of the boat clean off. Quint does manage to get another barrel into the shark before it swims away. So now the shark has 3 barrels in it, and there's no way it can go underwater with 3 barrels. Quint is very sure that that cannot happen. It happens. The shark gets away again. At this point, though, the boat has suffered too much damage, so they turn it around and try to head back to shore. Now they've just made the shark mad, though, because as they try to trudge towards the island again, the shark begins to chase them. There's too much water in the boat, the engine is shot, so at this point, the engine just goes out. And now the boat is sinking, with a very angry 25-foot shark right on their heels. They're now sitting ducks, slowly but surely sinking into the ocean. As a last resort, Hooper sets up the shark cage that he brought with him, and dons scuba equipment in an attempt to lure the shark close enough for him to inject it with a deadly dose of chemicals. However, in the water, the shark rams into the cage, making Hooper drop the harpoon. He has a knife on his person, though, and is able to stab the shark 3 or 4 times before the thing rips the cage to absolute shreds. Hooper does have scuba gear on, though, so he manages to escape down to a coral reef at the bottom of the ocean as the shark continues to thrash about the cage, tearing it apart like it is nothing. Meanwhile, Brody and Quint are trying their best to reel the shark cage up out of the water, but the shark is pulling on it so hard that it breaks the pulley that it's attached to. They manage to rig something and pull the rest of the cage out, but by this point it's in pieces and Hooper's gone. They have no time to mourn what they think is the death of their friend, however, because the 25-foot shark jumps out of the water and throws his 3-ton body onto the back of the sinking boat, causing it to upend. Both Brody and Quint begin to careen down the deck towards the chomping jaws of the great white. Brody manages to grab a hold of some railing, but Quint is not so lucky. Brody manages to have a grasp on Quint's hand, but it doesn't hold, and Quint continues to slide down the deck, right into the awaiting mouth of the shark. He's halfway swallowed by the shark, killed, and dragged under the water. By now, the small boat is about 90% of the way under the water. and Brody has trapped himself inside of the cabin. The shark bursts through the main window, though, trying to get at Brody. He reaches around for anything close to him and finds one of Hooper's compressed air tanks for scuba diving. He throws it into the shark's mouth, which dissuades it, and the shark goes away. Brody then manages to climb onto the roof of the cabin, taking Quint's rifle with him. The shark begins his final charge at the sinking boat as Brody climbs up into the crow's nest. As the shark advances, Brody sees that the air tank is still in its mouth. Almost completely submerged now, Brody has very little time to do something. Brody takes shots at the shark, missing 5 times. But on the 6th shot, he hits the compressed air tank inside the shark's mouth, and the whole thing explodes, finally killing the shark. Relieved and excited and exhausted, Brody kind of just sits in the water for a little bit, until Hooper suddenly emerges from his hiding place to join him. They take a quick minute to mourn Quint, grab a couple of the barrels that were attached to the shark, and swim back to the safety of the shore of Amity. The end! So there you go. If you've never seen Jaws, you now know what it's about. Now I'll give you my ratings based on certain criteria of the film. Number 1, the story. I think the story isn't very complex, but it's very classic. I'm really enthralled by it because I've seen the movie 100 times. Now, I haven't actually read the book, which I know is shame, but we're not talking about the book here, we're talking about the movie. And I really do think the story is kind of classic and timeless, and obviously this movie was made in 1975 and people are still watching it today. So the story does have some kind of timeless classicness to it. So I give story an 8.5. Number 2, acting. The 3 main actors, Roy Scheider, who plays Brody, Richard Dreyfuss, who plays Hooper, and Robert Shaw, who plays Quint, all absolutely kill it. Quint's not the most likable character, but Robert Shaw sells him so hardcore that Quint is actually my favorite character in this film. To me, he has the most depth, he has the most texture, he is one of those characters that even though you hate him, you love him, because he's just one of those really memorable characters. And as I mentioned before, Lorraine Gary plays Brody's wife, who has a very small part in the movie, but she's very good, she's very real, and I think she does a fantastic job. Overall, I think all of the actors did a very good job making their characters authentic, so I give acting a 9. Number 3, directing. I mean, it was Steven Spielberg, right? Like, the guy makes good movies. Even though this was one of his first big movies, and he had many problems on set. Many problems. The biggest of which was his mechanical shark not functioning 90% of the shoot. Even that happening, this movie has become one of the most iconic classic movies of all time. So as far as directing goes, I give Jaws a 9.5. Number 4, script. Now, this has nothing to do with the book. I've never read the book, so I can say nothing about how it is written. I do know that the author of the book co-wrote the screenplay with Carl Gottlieb, so I'm assuming there's probably very many similarities there. Some of the lines are a little corny. It is the 70s, but for the most part, the script does a really good job of transitioning from scene to scene and giving you all of the relevant information. So for script, I give it an 8. Number 5, production quality. So, I know that they had many issues with this filming. I know Steven Spielberg had a bunch of issues making this movie. It seemed like nothing in production went correctly. Again, mentioning that the main feature of the movie, the mechanical shark, didn't work right most of the time. And the few times you do see it, it's a mechanical shark from the 70s. It's not the worst thing you've ever seen, but you can definitely tell it's a mechanic shark from the 70s. It was filmed in Martha's Vineyard, which is a very nice part of Massachusetts, so the scenes and everything, the scenes that do take place in the town, are very well put together. Taking all of this into account, I give production quality a 7. Not the best in the world, but it could definitely have been worse. Number 6, music. Those 2 notes on the piano are some of the most recognizable in the history of music composition. You hear that and you instantly know something bad is about to happen. The rest of the score is pretty fantastic too. Not as well known as the main Jaws theme, but John Williams knows what he's doing. And the music does a really good job of setting the tone for the scenes. There is one scene where the music's a little happier than it should be, and I've never gotten it. But out of a 2-hour and 3-minute movie, a 10-second segment of music isn't that much. Overall, John Williams did an exceptional job, and I give music a 9.5. Number 7, family friendliness. This is where Jaws is gonna take the hit. Obviously, you're not gonna go into a movie about a shark killing a bunch of people thinking, yeah, I'll let my kids watch this. But violence isn't really the only thing that makes this a not family-friendly movie. I rate the family friendliness by 4 factors. I have mild language, heavy language, violence and gore, and sexual content and innuendos. Based on those 4 criteria, mild language was used 5 times, heavy language was a bit more extensive with 43. If you want to know how I distinguish mild and heavy language, if that really matters to you, just message me in the comments below and I'll give you my little graph of how I gauge that. Surprise, there's some violence in this movie and a little bit of gore. I'm really tough on how I gauge these things though, because if you're watching this, I want you to have all of the information. Teenagers are seen smoking and drinking. A girl is attacked and killed by a shark. No blood is seen in this scene, and you don't even see the shark. She's just screaming and she's violently thrashed about to and fro before she gets drug under. A small boy has a cut on his hand and you can see some blood on his hand. A dog is suggested to have been eaten by the shark, but you see nothing. The dog just disappears and you don't see it again. A young boy is attacked by a shark and you see him struggle as he is drug under, and there is lots of blood in the water. You don't see the boy injured, but it's very violent and you do know what happens. You do see the severed arm of the first victim in its entirety, like he pulls it out of a bin, so that could be a little graphic. A dead shark is shown with lots of blood around its mouth. It is kind of a realistic looking shark too, so that might freak some people out. We see the head of a dead body underwater and one of the eyeballs is missing. It's a little graphic. A man is knocked out of a small boat by the shark, and we do see him in the shark's mouth drug underwater. Right before we see his dismembered leg float to the bottom of the ocean with lots of blood. Chum and bloody water is seen throughout all of the scenes of the movie because they're trying to catch a shark. Quint's hand gets shred by some rope, so he has a big bloody wound on his hand. This is the most violent one. Quint does fall into the mouth of the shark feet first, and he is swallowed halfway up to the waist. The shark does bite down on his abdomen, and lots of blood spews from his mouth. It's a very bloody, violent scene. Quint is screaming the whole time. Blood spurts from his mouth and bloodies the water a lot, and his dead body is drug under. This is the most graphic scene in the movie, and it's one of the only scenes I kind of don't like to watch. It really does get me. Even though I've seen it 150 times, it's just a really distressing scene. And the final one is, after the shark blows up, a very unrecognizable version of its carcass floats down to the bottom of the ocean, very bloody. That's it on violence and gore, though. And finally, sexual content and innuendos. Teenagers are seen making out. The girl at the beginning of the movie is fully nude. She's in the dark, and you'd really have to squint to see anything, but the actress is fully nude. People are seen in swimsuits and swimming trunks and bikinis because it is summer on a beach. So you do see a massive crowd in swimwear throughout the movie. Brody's wife asks him if he wants to get drunk and fool around, which is very subtle. Quint has several off-color things to say about women throughout the movie. He's just rude and crude. So all 4 of these categories combined and taking all of them into account, unfortunately, family friendliness suffers with a score of 4. I do not recommend letting your children under the age of 16 watch this movie. Number 8, enjoyability. Anyone that knows me knows how much I enjoy this movie. I'd have to enjoy a movie if I watched it 150 times. I think there's humor in it. I think there's a good story to it. I'm never bored at any point in the movie, even though I can quote it and I know what's going to happen. I'm still enraptured every time I watch it. So no surprise here, enjoyability gets a 10 from me. Number 9, quoteability. There are several very quotable lines from this movie, the most famous of which is, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." That's kind of the most famous one. There's several more that I've kind of heard referenced in other films and shows and stuff. One of which is, "You yell barracuda, everybody says, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July." Another one is actually the name of the production company that makes House. I didn't know this till after I started to love Jaws, and it's even a little scene from Jaws. It's Bad Hat Harry Productions, and the line is, "That's some bad hat, Harry." So next time you watch House, look for that little snippet. Now you have inside knowledge. His wife famously asks him in both this movie and the second one, "Want to get drunk and fool around?" And that's actually referenced in several films I've seen, not related to the Jaws world. And then Quint has a moment with Hooper where he says, "You go inside the cage. Cage goes in the water. You go in the water. Shark's in the water. Our shark." There's actually a funny scene in Master of Disguise, a terrible lame movie from the 90s, but there's a scene where the main character does a Quint impression, and he kind of uses this line a little bit, and it's the only thing I remember about the movie, but I remember being like, "Hey, that's Quint from Jaws." So yeah, that's really 5. I think there's 5 there. So yeah, there's really only like 5 really notable lines from the movie, but obviously the big one is, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." So there's not many, but that one line being so famous I give Quoteability a 6.5. Number 10, would I rewatch? Yes, 100%, many times more than I should. I have rewatched many times more than I should, and I highly recommend that as an adult you should see this movie at least 6 times. So, rewatchability, would I watch again? Yes. This gets a 10, giving Jaws a final score of 82 out of 100, which isn't a perfect score, and I did try to take into account that I'm biased, because if I gave everything 100%, because I love the movie so much, it wouldn't be very accurate. So I wanted to take actual time to break things down for you, tell you why I didn't give it 100%, even though I love it so much. So there you go, folks. You now have the KrissNotes on the movie Jaws. Please comment, like, subscribe, do whatever you want to do this video, share it with your friends, share it with people who like Jaws, share it with people who have never seen Jaws and they want to know what it's about, share it on your Facebook. I don't care what you do with it. But thank you for watching, and please make sure that you look out for my next episode. If you have a movie that you'd like the KrissNotes on, please use that comment section below and tell me, and I'll watch the movie for you, and I'll give you a rundown on what it's about, and I'll cover all of his criteria. Every single episode of KrissNotes is going to cover the same criteria, give you a breakdown of what the movie's about. Could be educational, could be boring. I highly enjoy it, so I don't really care what you think. Ugly truth, there it is. Thank you for watching KrissNotes. Until next time.